Carl, you are the man to talk to today. So apparently, Xi Jinping and Donald Trump have a phone call. They have a phone call. And what do you think that phone call is about? Japan
Well, that's
and Taiwan.
That's interesting because on the White House readout, it says nothing
Right.
about Taiwan or Japan. But in the Chinese readout, they said two sides, US and China, should work together as the post-war victors of the World War II, as should be the upholder of the post-war order. Now, that is a reference, from China's perspective to the case of Taiwan and Japan, because, obviously Japan was the defeated enemy in the World War II, and Taiwan was returned to China as a result of Japan's surrender. And this is what Chinese readout is referring to. Of course, Donald Trump's White House readout mentioned none of that. But I mean, I think they did talk about it, and Trump just didn't want to embarrass the Japanese prime minister too much, given what she did, the recent antics, and Trump also confirmed that he was going to visit Beijing next year in April. So right now it looks like there is a tentative détente in the U.S.-China relationship as a result of their meeting in Busan in South Korea, and a temporary truce on the trade war. Trump is the type of person, he respects strength, right? He despises weakness. He said this publicly many times. This is why the European leaders, as much as they try to appease him on every issue, Trump just slapped them with tariff left and right. But whereas in Xi Jinping in China, Trump saw strength, in the way that China pushed back on the tariff war. So Trump respect that. And we're going to have to see how that hold out, because, the military industrial complex of Washington, U.S. really have logic of their own. They pretty much going to keep the tension going so they can keep on doing their weapon sales. So we're going to have to see how this Trump initiative will hold out over long term.
Yeah, agreed. The Chinese readout is very interesting compared to Trump's, because Trump is like, yeah, we talked about fentanyl and we talked about all this other random stuff and buying grain or soybeans. The Chinese readout was very specific. Muted, but specific. We talked about Taiwan. We talked about the post-World War II order. We talked about how important it was that the U.S. and China were the guarantors of that post-World II order. And obviously, all of this is talking about Japan. Japan is wilding out right now, and you need to calm down your lady. Like she is hopped up on something. You need to chill her out, because she's pissing us off right now. And by the way, she's not backing down from this. Like I saw this recent thing. It says, let's see, Tachaki explained that while Japan would never ever accept threats against Taiwan or Japan, we're always willing to talk. Increasingly, it seems like the CCP is not interested in dialogue, and therefore we must rearm immediately. Now, immediately after this phone call with Donald Trump, apparently Trump, the very next day, called the Prime Minister of Japan. They are not disclosing what that conversation was about. Correct. But obviously, that conversation was about, you need to chill out. You need to chill out.
I mean,
that's what I think it was about.
In Japan's case, this is obviously premeditated. The Prime Minister of Japan didn't wake up one day and decide, you know what, I'm going to poke the panda today. Because right after her speech, Japan just announced they're going to deploy missiles within 70 miles of Taiwan, on the closest island that Japan has control over, in the Yonaguni Island. And again, this has been planned out way in advance, because you can't just do missile deployment like that. There have been preparation, setting up base and everything. So this is all part of the plan. Now the question really is, why is the Japanese minister doing this at this particular juncture? Now, I'm going to stick stick to my conjecture that this is precisely because currently it looks like there's a temporary détente in the Sino-American relationship, and this is equivalent of the Europeans saying, oh, you know what, if America's not going to fight the Ukraine war, we're going to fund it, we're going to keep it going. I mean, like Germany, Merz just said they're going to deploy deploy missiles to long range missiles into Ukraine, but this is really just the way for the imperial vassals to cry for help, to cry for the US to come back into their arena, because for Japan right now, Japan is facing very tough economic headwind. Japanese economy is quietly imploding right now. That's going to also have a cascading effect on the U.S. economy, because there has been a decade-long what's called yen carry trade, because when Japan had pumped a lot of money, keep the interest low, so a lot of the Wall Street guys thought, hey, we're the smartest guys in the room. We're going to borrow tons of money, yen, from Japan, and we're going to invest it in high-yielding U.S. assets like stocks, right? But when the Japanese, I don't know if people are paying attention, but the Japanese interest rate is rising and rising, and that means all these people who had borrowed money, many of them are margins, to invest in the U.S. stocks, now suddenly, like, holy crap, we have to pay back with interest, with a lot more interest. So a lot of people are going to start panicking and unwind their positions, and that's going to have a negative impact on the U.S. stock market and the bond market. But Japan, this is all because Japan is facing some serious economic issues. So why is the Japanese prime minister? You got to ask, why is she doing this at this particular juncture? And the reason why is because they're panicking. They're panicking because back in the days of Obama era, Obama openly spoke about how Asia Pacific is going to be the future. The Atlantic, that is the old stuff. We're going to shift our focus on the Pacific because this is the fastest growing region of the globe. And Obama spoke glowingly about how Japan is going to be the junior partner of the United States, the way that UK had been playing that role in the transatlantic relationship, right? And Japan was going to be U.S. centerpiece to continue to dominate Western Pacific and East Asia. And one of Obama's baby was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Do you remember that? The Trans-Pacific Partnership? And then that coincided with pivot to Asia. That also happened under Obama's first term under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And then what happened is Trump came to the office the first term. He scattered that. He scattered the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was dead in the water. And Trump himself personally have a personal antagonism against Japan. Because you got to remember, Trump is his peak years is 1980s. That's the time that left a very deep impression in Trump. And in 1980s, if you look at Trump's statement, he keep on railing against Japan. How Japan is taking advantage of us, how Japan is, he wants to make the Japan pay. I think he's still kind of stuck in that mode. This is why some of the quote unquote U.S. allies are worried about Trump, because he's kind of scattered. They're afraid that he will scatter the whole Obama-Biden legacy of.
Wait, Carl, I'm sorry to interrupt. What happened in the 80s? I'm just lost. What happened in the 80s that pissed Trump off?
What happened in the 80s? That was a high day of Japan miracle. Remember, there was a time they thought Japan was going to overtake the United States as a dominant economy in the world. Japan,
really?
You remember 1990s? All this Japan fear mongering. You have like George Freeman coming out with a book called The Coming War with Japan, and you have Michael Crichton wrote that book, Rising Sun, which made into a movie with Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery. Remember that? And it was that
Yes.
movie was literally these Japanese bastards coming here and taking our white women. Yeah, and they were running amok. They're buying our assets. They're buying everything in Los Angeles, in New York, right? And that was the height of that, by the way, the Michael Crichton's book was published just before the Japanese asset bubble bursted, right? So that was the height of the American fear of Japan, and Donald Trump was his peak years. That's how because he was complaining about how Toyota was taking over, like why Americans driving Japanese cars back then. Mm-hmm. So he has he has a thing. He has a thing against Japan. His antagonism with Japan carried over into year 2025, and this is why a lot of people in the Japanese establishment, they're really worried. Like the Japan-U.S. Security Pact, which had been for the Japanese right wing their cornerstone policy for decades, is gonna looking increasingly wobbly. Looks like U.S. might at least a tactical retreat, pivot away temporarily from Asia Pacific to wage war on Venezuela, right? And they don't want that. They want, so this is why they feel like they need to press that button. They need to cross China's reddest of red line on Taiwan to create a crisis that forced United States to take a stance. So we got to stand with allies. You're already seeing a lot of U.S. politicians, EU politicians are already echoing that sentiment. And a lot of Twitter, quote unquote, influencers are all like, standing Japan right now. Because this would create a pressure for Donald Trump administration to do the same. And I think that is a gambit of the Japanese prime minister. Because they would very much like to return to kind of the Obama era relationship where Japan would essentially replace Great Britain as the special relationship with United States. Because, Pacific was supposed to eclipse the Atlantic, and then the Japan's future then will be secure as a junior partner of the United States. But now when Trump started talking about G2, that put Japan's future suddenly in jeopardy. This is my opinion. This is why the Japanese prime minister is doing what she's doing. She's trying to bring back the Japan-U.S. alliance into the central focus by creating a huge diplomatic crisis with China.
Interesting. Does Japan know that the fascist countries that were associated with World War II, that there's a UN charter that allows for, let's say, the powers that won that war to attack those countries if indeed those countries were like remilitarizing and posing a threat to other countries? Meaning,
well, I have to admit, this was the first time I learned about it. Even because like China actually digged out that UN charter.
Well, I knew about it from Germany in the context of like Russia and Germany, where Russia could be like, look, don't mess with us. We'll go after you if we need to. But Japan was one of those fascist militaristic countries also.
Yeah, but Japan sees itself as the junior partner of the United States. They have hitched their future onto the bandwagon of the U.S. empire. They thought they're kind of in the protected status, right? They're under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, so they thought they're safe. And this is another reason they are in power, so to speak, to poke the bear, because they thought, okay, well, U.S. will have to get our back because the U.S. nuclear umbrella covers us. But right now they're really trying to position themselves as the number one U.S. deputy in the Asia Pacific. That's the role they're going for.
China apparently has been quietly putting out strike maps against Japan. Have you seen this? DD Geopolitics released this. And these are sites where if some kind of war or something like that sparks off, that these are apparently the sites that China would hit Japan on.
Well, I just saw a Twitter account of a Chinese space. It's usually like this. This account usually tweet about China's space program. Like the space station and all that. Today, I just saw that account tweeting about China's latest hypersonic missiles. And in the animated, in the video, in the end of the video is all those hypersonic missile warhead heading toward Japan.
Really?
So China is yes.
They're serious about this, basically. That's your point. They're very serious about this.
Yeah, I mean, like you, it's a reminder. Okay, two can play this game. If you're gonna place missiles 70 miles from Taiwan, well, guess what? We don't need to place missiles we have missiles based in China that can hit you, and they will hit you at hypersonic speed that you cannot avoid. So I mean, it's just a reminder. Like these things shouldn't have need to be said, but given today's political environment, it needs to be made explicit. Like if you want to get involved in a war, this is what it looks like. This is what the war with China would look like for you.
Wow. This has escalated so much and so fast. I mean, I guess this is bad blood, as you pointed out once before, going back to the Second World War, for scores to be settled. But Japan has to know that it is not what it was in the Second World War. It is not this major militaristic superpower.
That's why they need a United States. They need to drag United States back in, because right now Trump is looking like he's in the final inning of trying to close out the Ukraine war, and so Japan thought, okay, well, this is our chance to be the centerpiece of the U.S. imperium, but at the same time, Trump looks like his own administration is kind of besetted by all kind of domestic issues right now. There's a revolt among MAGA ranks, over the Epstein files. So Japan's like, hey, don't be distracted. Let's focus on the goal here.
Yeah, it's like focus on what's important. Us. Focus on us.
Yes.
What do you think about people who would say, well, the United States is really pushing Japan to behave this way? You don't buy that at all.
I don't think that's the case, because I think U.S. right now, it already had its hands full. U.S. would prefer to have certain tensions, no doubt, so the military-industrial complex can keep on selling weapons, particularly to Taiwan. But it doesn't need to dial that to 11, right? Like U.S. is always trying to fine-tune the tensions, so it doesn't go to war, but it gets simmering enough that they can keep the racket and the grift going. But they also is very careful. Like a lot, even you. This is what the Japanese PM did is basically ditching the whole concept of strategic ambiguity, right? I mean, for the longest time, even U.S. is trying to dance around are we or are we not going to come to get involved in a war around Taiwan? They say, well, can neither deny or confirm. But this time, the Japanese Prime Minister spout out explicitly, say if there's warship around Taiwan, then that will be an existential issue for Japan that will obligate us to put our self-defense force outside of Japan to defend our interests. And that's kind of announcement that's the path to war. But I don't think even the U.S. military industrial complex at this particular point is ready to kick off World War III. They just want to keep the grip going.
And I guess the second question with this is, how serious is China with this? Like, this is not. It sounds like right now this is saber-rattling, and it sounds like
right now
China.
I mean, China is very upset. China is very upset that Japan choose to cross the red line. So there's going to be diplomatic pressure, and there's going to be economic pressure. The economic pressure already happened. The tons of flight from China has been canceled going to Japan, and the Japanese tourism consists of about 7% of Japanese GDP, and the Chinese tourists are the second largest tourist group to visit Japan after South Korea. So the Japanese tourist economy is going to take a hit, no doubt. All the moms and pop shop catering to tourists, they're going to take a hit. And that will also apply to all kind of business deals. So now there's an idea that's being floated in Japan. They're talking about possibly applying a semiconductor component restriction on China. But they also need U.S. help, right? So before it was U.S. pressuring companies from Japan, Taiwan, Netherlands to do semiconductor sanction on China. But now it's Japan wanting U.S. to help them to put the pressure on China on the semiconductor supply chain. But that's a very dangerous game because China still holds the rare earth supply chain. If China gonna tighten the grip on their balls over rare earth, there's still no good answers for that. I mean, they can't. We already saw what happened when Trump tried to tighten the semiconductor restriction on China. China just say, okay, no rare earth for you. And if Japan chose to go to the economic pressure route, I don't think they have what it takes by themselves. This is why they're asking help from the United States, because they also realize by themselves, as you say, Japan at current in 2025 by themselves, they would not be able to confront China, whether militarily or economically. This is why they need United States, and so this is this is Japan's cry for help. It's like, come back, we need you, come back. This is my take on the situation.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Why
Japan?
This is why, by the way, the recent Chinese announcement is all pointed at Japan. They're not blaming United States. They're not blaming Donald Trump creating the tension over this. They're all putting the blame squarely on the Japanese Prime Minister. So in the meantime, Xi Jinping is picking up the phone with Donald Trump. They're having a chat, which according to Donald Trump is very cordial. They had a great call. So I think this. I'm gonna stand by my reading of the events. I think this is kind of the tail wagging the dog situation. Well, the tail is attempting to wag the dog, but I don't think it will succeed.
One of the what time is it? Okay, we got 2 minutes. One of the people on Twitter who covers Chinese topics, Arnard Bertrand, I believe the name is.
Yeah,
she pointed out.
Really.
I think it's he. He pointed out that he thinks that this is a reshaping of the U.S. relationship between China and the United States, and that and I got to be honest, I disagree with some of the stuff Arnaud says, because he thinks that the United States on some level is pulling back from China. I don't necessarily buy that. I think this may be a repositioning. I don't know if it's a pullback, but whatever, putting that to the side for the moment. He makes this argument that this phone call on some level is trying to reshape the relationship between the United States from, let's say enemies or competitors in an overt sense, into guarantors of the post-World War II order. Like basically, we are trying to reframe you and reframe the way we relate to one another. Now that we've recognized each other as peers, then we need to go forward with this post-World War II order. And a recognition of that post-World War II order is that Taiwan is part of China, which I don't think the U.S. is going to accept. But that's his thoughts. Give me your thought on that. We have about 3 minutes.
I think U.S. I mean, it's obvious the U.S. elite would never give up on the U.S. primacy. That has always been the goal. And for
Yes.
the U.S. primacy, that they need to keep China and Russia in check. But I think what's happening is that they're doing a tactical pivot, not a strategic pivot. It's a tactical pivot to have so it could be advantageous to have a temporary détente with China and Russia. So U.S. can focus rooting out the Chinese influence from the other, like, for example, West Hemisphere in Venezuela or Africa. By the time the U.S. have those sphere dominated, then they're a little bit more secure to then pivot back to come from Russia and China. This is my take. But I mean, but that is a shift away from kind of like we're going to take on three-front war against Russia, China, and Iran at the same time, like they were saying just like a few years ago. So I think this also explains why Europe and Japan, all these vassals, are now trying to position themselves, trying to kind of alter that trajectory of U.S. because they realize if the U.S. even do a tactical pivot, they will be the ones that end up holding the bag, right? I mean, and that's not going to be looking pretty for them.
Carl, man, I always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this. Carl Zha, hosts Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Zha. You can follow his podcasts at Steel Silk, the letter N. And you can subscribe and support the podcast on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Carl, always appreciate you, man. Always enjoy these conversations. Always informed after the conversation. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Jamar.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.